Hi, everyone. This is Rob Doggett coming to you from the State University of New York at Geneseo on behalf of the International Yeats Society. And I'm here to talk with Zsuzsanna Balázs about a nice little Yeats play called The Land of Heart's Desire. How you doing? It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Rob, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm doing well, thank you. What about you?
I'm doing okay. As we were talking beforehand, I'm on sabbatical. So
Yeah.
as the world is kind of awful all around me, I'm actually doing pretty well in my personal life. So it's a weird disjunction, but I find these conversations really nice to just take a break from all the news that's going on and to talk about Yeats. So it's a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it. Now you were, I know you were at Galway, Irish Research Council scholar at NUI Galway, and you just finished up last year, and now you're at you're an assistant professor in communications at Obuda in Budapest.
Yes.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's been a long way with ups and downs, but eventually I got there, and I'm very grateful and happy about it because I have been missing working with students a lot. So in the autumn, I didn't have any contact with students, and I couldn't teach anything. So it was very hard, like that kind of absence to deal with in my life. But I'm back on track.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah. The only thing is that I'm not teaching literature, so I miss that. And I actually haven't talked about Yeats for a couple of months. So this is also why I was so happy that you offered me this possibility.
Well, this is great. And this is the first in the Yeats conversations where we're talking about a play. I have a couple more lined up, but you're the starting point for the play. And I think it's a good starting point because it's an early Yeats play. And I was really intrigued by your ideas about talking about it from a queer perspective. And I think that's going to be really, really exciting for me and something I hadn't thought a ton about as I read the play. But before we do that, what kind of research are you working on right now?
Well, at the moment, I'm trying to turn my PhD into a monograph. And I think I will spend the entire summer on that project. But I also have like a postdoc project on the history of female to male transvestism in Irish drama and theater. But I haven't really had time to go into more detail. This was my postdoc project, but I haven't received the postdocs that I have applied to. So it's just a project that's there, but I need to find the time for it. And I know that this summer, if I manage to go to Limerick, then I will be talking about this aspect, this new research.
And that's at the ISIL conference
yes.
Yeah, and that's when we're recording this in May. So when is that conference?
I'm sorry, say that again.
When is the conference?
Towards the end of July. I'm not sure about the exact date, but it usually coincides with the Yeats Summer School.
Yeah, and that's a great conference to go to. So why? Then we were kind of kicking around different things to talk about. Why did you choose this particular play?
Well, I was very hesitant about what kind of play or what kind of work by Yeats to choose, but I opted for this play because I have been thinking about this play ever since I came back to Budapest in 2020. At the beginning of COVID, and that was also when in Hungary, this very intense homophobic propaganda began, and this kind of obsession with the family and the normative family, and reducing women's role to to that of mothers and wives. And I just felt that this I noticed that I kept thinking about this play, and then I looked at it again, and I realized that actually it resonates very, very closely with what's happening today. This homophobic propaganda also involved the censorship of a book titled "The Fairyland" for everyone. But I don't want to, just talk about it at the beginning of this, because that would kind of divert the conversation. We can talk about it.
Yeah, let's at the end, I'll
later.
ask you a bit more about that connection. And I found, as rereading the play, I sort of always think about this play as a kind of standard early Yeats, as the conflict between the sort of demands of the ordinary familial life and the lure of something else, with some other way of being that's often represented by the fairies.
Yeah.
But I hadn't thought about it in terms of the normative family. And when I read it again last night, I started to, because you'd mentioned that a little bit in your email, and I was like, oh, I started to see it a bit. So I'm really excited about hearing you expand on that. But maybe for people, I assume most people know this play in general, but maybe just in case, we can start with just a quick summary of the play.
Yeah, sure. Basically, this play starts with the image of a family home. There is a newly married couple, Sean and Mary Bruin, and it's a family scene. And then this family scene is all of a sudden interrupted by the presence of strange creatures from whose voices can be heard from outside the house, and who eventually lure Mary into the world of the fairy. And it's very interesting to see in the play, like the spatial arrangement that from the very beginning, Mary is very distant from her family members, and she's standing by the door looking at a book, reading about a kinder and more tolerant world. And she's also the first one who notices that something is going on outside, and she is the only one who throughout the play finds these creatures very, very interesting and very attractive. And eventually this kind of fairy child helps her realize that even more that her freedom has been denied so far in her life, and she wants to escape from this oppressive atmosphere. So in the end, there is a long scene of competition between, the family and the fairy child. They are trying to convince Mary why she should stay with the family or why she should leave the family. And it's very interesting that she just dies. And it's another topic for discussion: how should we interpret her death? And but this is just a summary, brief summary of what's going on in the play.
I think too that the context, so set in a cottage in County Sligo on a May Eve, and the kind of folklore background of the idea of this is a time when traditionally it's thought that the fairies will steal away newly married brides. So Mary, as the newly married bride, is in the is the context for this. And so you had mentioned the idea of approaching this from a queer perspective, and I for me that sort of gets at the idea of heteronormativity, sort of enforced domesticity. But I want to make sure we're clear at the start. How are you using queer and maybe some of the sort of theoretical background that you're bringing to bear on the play?
It's good that you asked that because sometimes I get misunderstood, or this term gets misunderstood, or gets reduced to simply meaning homosexual desire. But it's actually not, and in Yeats's drama and other works as well, it's more like a general resistance to the dominant and to the legitimate, to authority, and also a kind of a set of desires that can be described as anti-normative, but also unorthodox representations of power relationships, or normative gender roles. So it's not just homo eros that we are talking about here. Mm-hmm. And this is the great thing about the term queer, that it opens up so many avenues of understanding Yeats' plays. And, my aim is not, to kind of just pull the rainbow flag on Yeats or whatever. Even though, like people can argue that I'm doing that, but it's more like showing that okay, there are the more established traditional readings of Yeats' plays, but looking at the networks he had and his attention to the sexual tension of some of his close friends, mm-hmm. Like we just simply cannot deny the presence of queer feelings, queer historical structures of feeling in the plays. Actually, this term "queer historical structures of feeling" it's mentioned by Heather Love in the book Feeling Backward. And I found it extremely useful because it shows that, queer historical structures of feeling also involve just generally the failure to meet social expectations, a sense of discomfort with available scripts of living and loving, and some sort of excitement that comes from this sense of discomfort, which opens up a new world, which is unknown, which is strange, but still attractive. And I think it's a very useful thing to consider when we interpret this play.
It's interesting as you're talking, because I think in my experience with students, and we haven't, in my classes, we don't often cover this play. It's mostly his poetry. And my students are often eager to slot him into a very standard heteronormative romantic paradigm. And I think in some ways it's easy to see Yeats doing the whole objectification bit in his love poetry. And even though I talk about that as performative and try to complicate the sort of standard notion of objectification, complicate, not because there are certainly elements of that in Yeats, but to try to also introduce alternative ways of thinking about what he's doing. It's sometimes hard to do, but as you're talking about queerness in this particular way, opening up other worlds of desire, I think that's really useful. And I also think it's a way to bring in something that I'll often point out, probably a bit defensively, when I talk about Yeats's poetry. In his personal life, he had these networks of friendships with women who were not at all conforming to normative gender types, and were not at all embracing the kind of trappings of domesticity, etc. So I think what you're doing here is actually really useful, not just for thinking about this play, but for thinking about Yeats more broadly in terms of gender and sexuality, and maybe bringing in a little bit more those kinds of networks that he had. And I know for this particular playwright was dedicated to Florence Farr, who's one of those first kinds of women that Yeats had friendships throughout his life with, who were for their time really radical. So I don't know, do you want to talk about Farr at all?
Oh, I love Farr. Yeah, I would love to talk about.
Okay.
I really admire her, not just as an actor, but as a writer. Many people like scholarship sometimes tends to or ignore mentioning the fact that she also was an essayist and a novelist and a playwright, and currently my favorite is this astonishing essay, Modern Woman, Her Intentions, which was written in 1910. And obviously the thoughts the ideas that she describes in that essay were already kind of present in her life earlier as well, around the beginning of her friendship with Yeats. And there are a couple of moments in the play which we can just connect to what Farr says in this essay. And I actually have the essay here with me, and let me just read out how Farr summarizes the content of the essay. So we want to change public opinion about divorce, contagious diseases, and forethought with regard to breeding. We want married women to recognize the various proportions of sexuality in each sex, to make allowance for the passionate, and to admit that we are greatly indebted for our culture to individuals who do not desire to be parents. And what really kind of resonates with what happens in the play is actually a criticism, her criticism of her of the idea of a happy home. And she says the section is called Experiments, and Farr says, I dislike the home because it means that one has to live with people who are privileged to behave without politeness in each other's company. Most of us share the feeling, I think, that we like to be the worst behaved person present. I was brought up in a large family until I was 23, and I lived the orthodox married life for 4 years, so that I have given home and the family as much trial as seemed necessary. And then she continues that I have no regrets because my failures have been some of my most valuable experiences, and my moments of bitterness have been the cause of my greatest contentment. And this kind of, mentioning or pointing out the fact that the home is not necessarily a happy place, or at least not for everyone. There are lucky ones for whom, yes, it is, but there is no such thing as a compulsory, like a compulsory happy home as a compulsory happy place. It's not. And she acknowledges that here, and also that she kind of turned her failure, her perceived failure, into an alternative success story, which is quite astonishing. And yeah, we will see that this is what happens in the play as well.
As you're talking, it's interesting because it really reinforces the degree to which I think the play, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but the way that the play ultimately sort of sympathizes with the world of the Faeries, even though at the end it presents a number of, as you were saying at the outset, a number of kind of, Yeats wouldn't use the term, but it's sort of case for or argument for domesticity. And we have the sort of motherhood is one sort of thing, and then motherhood and financial security, and then we have the priest in the home sort of reinforcing it with a kind of moral framework. And then I think the most compelling on the case for home is Sean, with his sort of romantic, with love, with heteronormative love there. But I think the play, in its dedication to Florence Farr, suggesting the degree to which that is a kind of compelled happiness that doesn't resonate with everyone, and that it's just one template for being. So I think what you're saying, and I didn't know that essay, and I think I'm going to check that out. But I think that's a great one to bring in the next time I teach this play, and the next time I teach a lot of the early Yeats and gender and sexuality, because I think that's the quote you used was fantastic. Now you said before, the idea of the Faeries as having a connection with a kind of queerness, and I wonder if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, in Irish literature, there is this strong connection between marginalized subjectivities and the Faeries. Mm-hmm. And I think Angela Burke and Charlotte McIver have written about this. That in fact, it's a smart thing to use the Faeries to kind of code homoeros or other sorts of illicit desires or content that otherwise would be censored, because they have some kind of double meaning. As far as I know, they I think it was Charlotte McIver in I don't remember the title of her essay, but she basically argued that they can be interpreted both as both within a heteronormative framework, but also as a zone for an alternative queer history or queer space. I don't remember the exact quote, but I remember McIver telling about this kind of double meaning of the Faerie, and that their constant eavesdropping is also, it also implies the fact that there is some content that should not be said aloud. There is something that is marked by silence. So this kind of content that shouldn't be expressed explicitly. And I don't know, the whole supernatural, if we can just talk about the supernatural in general, that it also kind of, if you look at Yeats's drama in general, the supernatural characters are often not steadily gendered, or they allow for some sort of gender fluidity. So, and in this particular play, I think this attractive but also scary and unknown realm of the supernatural helps sharpen the tension between the representatives of the normative family and its unhappy, melancholy subject, who is much more attracted to this unknown world than to the certainty of the family home. And also Yeats was not the only one who used the supernatural to code illicit desires, because it's present in Edward Martin plays as well, John Todd Hunter's plays, and Florence Farr's writings as well. And I'm sure there are many other examples out there.
One of the things that struck me as I was thinking about the broader context as you're talking to about, obviously works like The Goblin Market or something. I mean, these are, works where we have an erotics encoded in the world of the Faeries. One of the things that struck me as I was reading the play last night is the ritualized elements in the ways that Mary is sort of calling to the fairies, perhaps unknowingly, the scattering of the primrose, the bringing the fire outside, the milk, this kind of dalliance at the threshold that we see with this woman who's clearly attracted to this other world, which I think encodes a different erotics, and is also fearful of it. So there's a kind of dalliance with liberation, but it also seems to follow a ritual. And I'm wondering, I don't know if that's a good way to, I'm not sure if that's a question, but it's just an observation I had, that there's this world of sort of freedom that transcends or breaks down boundaries and organization. At the same time, to reach that world, we follow a set of kind of rituals to get there. And I wonder if that represents this kind of tension that you're talking about between the pull of the normative home and this other queer space. Does that make sense of the question?
Yeah, that there is a certain ritual that Mary is going through, or is that what you mean?
Yeah,
in the play. That's there is
familiar, I think, to Yeats's readers about like folklore. Like there are things that happen that if you do these things, you're drawing the fairies into your home. Like if you follow these kinds of patterns, sort of unbeknownst to you, you're sort of welcoming them into the home. So it's like she's following a script in some ways of dalliance that then would open up to something else. I guess maybe it's a way of thinking about, I don't know, the way that Mary is being seduced and what the seduction means when we think about Mary. Like, are the fairies in some ways a manifestation of her own desire that already existed? Or are they a force that overcomes a set of assumptions?
I think now that you mentioned this, that maybe this is not entirely new to her. Just she hasn't realized it before, hasn't come to terms with it. You know, towards the end of the play, I remember that there is some reference. Yes, it's almost the very end, when the seduction is already complete and they call each other little bird and dear face, dear voice, and Mary asks her, oh, take me with you. And it's somewhere there that Mary says that I always loved her word, and yet, as if suggesting that, you know, she has been considering this kind of escape, but obviously it's not a smooth path, because we see that if you look at the beginning of the play, we have this confined space of the house, of the family home, and which kind of reflects the narrow-mindedness of the people in it. But Mary's spatial position is completely different, because she is standing by the door, which signals also her liminal position, and she is reading a book, and that book will be another interesting topic because it really disturbs the other characters. So we have this kind of Mary dreaming about another word. So at the beginning, she's clearly distant from her family, and there are references to the fact that she talks back to her mother-in-law quite a lot. And, you know, adjectives that they use for her to describe her wild, and they imply that she's very talkative, talks back. And these were also the kind of adjectives used to describe new women at the time. And then there is a point when the fairy is already present, when we have Mary is almost seduced back by Sean. It's a short scene, but it's like, It's a short play, but I can't seem to find it. Oh yeah. Yes. Mary says, like, she has a dialogue with Sean, and Mary says, your looks are all the candles that I need. And it's a love scene, but then a voice singing in the wood. So the fairy's voice creeps in, and Mary's attention is diverted again. So and after that, the fairy is already the child, but the others perceive her as a child. So they let her in, and the fairy starts asking everyone, "Do you love me?" And everyone answers yes, because they cannot see her anything but a child. But something is going on in Mary there, because Mary is the only one who answers, "I do not know." And I don't know if you are familiar with Susan Harris's analysis of this play from a queer perspective. And actually, I love the way that she points out, with regard to this particular sentence, that she's hesitant because she understands that how many kinds of love might be implied in that question. And this is why she's hesitant. She's neither dismissive nor, her answer is neither dismissive nor affirmative. And then Father Hart and the others argue, they try to win her back, and she's hesitant again, but eventually she gives in and opts for, this unknown bird and the fairy child. So it's not a smooth journey.
It's interesting, and I forgot about Harris's piece on this, which I haven't read in ages, but I think the idea of that you're bringing up here is really interesting. When the child says, "Do you love me?" the ways that the other characters understand love are within the terms of a set of pre-constructed notions about what love means, and they inevitably slot it into this kind of parental kind of love, but a very sort of narrow set of loving. And I think you're right. Mary's the only one who can understand love as outside the boundaries of that kind of narrow set of loving. And that's, I think, a clue to why she is so drawn to the child and to the fairy world and to this encoded other erotics in a way that the other characters can't seem to even grasp or understand.
Yeah.
Can I ask, I want to go back to the yellow book, the reading of the book. And one of the things that struck me, as you were talking, is the family seems, and we see this a lot in Yeats, some of his early plays about peasant life. You think of Kathleen New Houlihan like this. Of course, Gregory wrote the whole first section of Kathleen New Houlihan, but the stress is on like the material comforts of the domestic space, responsibility and productivity in those spaces where everything is understood within this kind of production economy, where everything that occurs is useful. And I think the broader context is important here, where you had a lot of British discourse about the peasant home, suggesting it was a place of idleness and disorder, and where there was no production. That goes back all the way to the way that the famines were regarded, etc., as the peasant home as a sort of disorderly space. And a lot of nationalist responses during this period, especially ones that people were concerned about emigration, emphasizing the importance of an ordered home, and an ordered home that was productive, where everything was for a purpose, for ordering, for maintaining the home. And the idea of reading as a kind of idleness here, that they seem to be very concerned about, that a woman would be idle. And I should, as you're talking about it, I sort of think, I wonder if that ties in with the kind of queer analysis you're doing here.
Yes, absolutely. Like this kind of I want to mention another queer theorist whose work is relevant here. It's Sarah Ahmed wrote a book, Willful Subjects or Willing Subjects. I don't remember exactly, but basically it's like what Mary denies here is a willingness to reproduce the family line. And yeah,
right. Like that's ultimately when it coming down to sexuality as itself useful and productive, her function as a producer of children, right? Like there's a form of idleness in the rejection of that role, and thinking about, not to get too political with the US, but we've just had the leak about the about Roe v. Wade in the US, which I'm sure you know a little bit about, but a lot of discussion about forced pregnancy here. And I'm seeing this idea of a fear of women who are not productive in the familial line, like this regulation to be their primary use value as producers of children, and that idleness and willingness here, this kind of threat to all of that.
And I think this is absolutely, and this is why Florence Farr's work is seminal to display, because because she basically says that, or kind of demands society to respect those people who just decide that they don't want to be parents, and they actually make great contributions to our society as well, and just leave them alone. Like just don't harass them because they don't want children. And here, like, because of this refusal, so that's another thing that's so queer, that making these big refusals, great refusals, and Yeats' drama, which you can observe in a lot of his protagonists, that all of them make these great refusals of something, and she denies the basic principle of the normative family, and this can also be seen at in a specific or concrete gesture, that everyone is concerned about, sitting at the table, having dinner, drinking wine, and Mary is not even interested in that. Like they are all interested in food, and talks about happiness, that and raising children, and they are trying to suggest that, you will grow out of this phase of idleness, and you will see how great it is to raise children. So nobody cares about the real reason for her melancholia. And melancholy is another thing that historically, it's a sociologist, that Didier Erewhon, who says that there is a specific homosexual melancholia resulting from a certain split habitus. And we can see these in recent films as well, like have you seen The Ammonite?
No.
Which features Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan. And it's based on a real story, but melancholia is phrased there as a kind of a signifier for, a repressed queer desire. And once the queer desire, when the two women can express their love for each other, the melancholia is gone. And also the Netflix series, Wretched, with Sarah Paulson, and in there as well, there a scene when patients come in and they are all diagnosed with melancholia. The doctor says that we are suffering from melancholia, and actually both of them are lesbians. So there is certainly this kind of angle as well, our approach to melancholia here. I don't know what I was talking about.
No, it's okay. We're trying. I think the idea of the family with these kinds of levels of enforced domesticity and paradigms for established patterns for love, established patterns for behavior, the larger sort of master narrative of a sort of desire is maybe more chaotic as you're young and then gets tempered as you adjust to the comforts of the home. Like, these are all pressures, societal pressures, that I think the play is exploring. And I like your point about the Great Refusal, because I think we see that from the start in Mary, this continual refusal to embrace all of these kinds of systems that would regulate her desire. And the refusal manifests itself initially, I think you're right, in this kind of melancholia, and this kind of embracing of idleness and uselessness, that sort of marks an alternative, the opening up of an alternative space for non-normative desire. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that the lure of the family, is interesting. I think as I read the play, for me, you read it, just like, oh God, that sounds kind of awful, this domesticity. But I think for an Irish audience, during this period, they would really see that as a powerful draw, as I was saying before, against the backdrop of sort of cultural imperialist stereotypes about the disordered home, against nationalist arguments about productive homes. And then you can see the legacy of this in someone like, De Valera's famous Comely Maiden's speech, this sort of vision of the happy, healthy peasant home with everyone embracing this kind of domesticity. And this play is a really radical, and I'm realizing, like, how, as you're talking, how radical this play actually is in its challenge to all of those kinds of normative cultural forces.
Yeah, and now that, like, talking about the play being radical, like, I think we can also notice a change in Mary's the amount that Mary speaks, because at the beginning, Bridget, her mother-in-law, is just bad-mouthing her all the time, like that she's not a fitting wife for any man, and that she's idle. She wouldn't.
He says in one line, "She's given milk away. I knew she would bring evil on the house." Right?
Yeah, and
away, like that's interesting too. What I was talking before about that kind of ritualized stuff. She's like giving things away, like just this idea of like not valuing production and products and instead being profligate with things, and like profligate with goods suggests, again, profligacy with desire, with sexuality as well. So
and then there seems to be a point when Mary has had enough. And it's quite a long speech she has there. It starts with Mary saying, "What do I care if I have given this house where I must hear all day a bitter tongue into the power of Faeries?" So she even, like, it's not just that she gives things away to that word, but at some point she declares that she doesn't care, because she's so fed up with this oppressive atmosphere that she has to endure day by day. And then she exclaims that, "Come, Faeries, take me out of this dull house. Let me have all the freedom I have lost." So this also implies that as if she, she has lost the freedom. So did she have freedom like sometime in the past, or she has lost something? So this is also, well, queer genealogy is also very much about loss and then it's
I wonder
very, yeah.
I'm sorry, I wonder if that idea of freedom I've lost, this idea of, I was reading a story recently. This is an odd connection, but I was reading a piece in the New York Times, an editorial about a woman who is choosing breast reduction. And she talks about being young and playing sports and this freedom of being a girl, that then when she matured and developed breasts, and she was so conscious of continually being like objectified and slotted into this kind of heterosexual desire that she didn't really respond to and felt really constraining. And so in some ways, I think this like idea of the freedom I've lost is maybe a self prior to being interpolated within a kind of compulsory heterosexuality system. The other thing that was interesting about that passage, come Faeries, take me out of this dollhouse, let me have all the freedom I've lost, work when I will and idle when I will. And I like that idea of, again, idleness, like to be able to choose idleness. And that the word idle comes up at least one more time I can remember in the play, and that sort of idleness as again, a radical act in the face of all sorts of enforced production, which is tied to, I think, sexual reproduction.
Yeah, like capitalism and authoritarian normativity are obsessed with production. They only value things that are productive, and in this kind of narrative, being idle or just doing things that do not have any tangible result or value in that word. It has value for her, but like intellectual activity, but for them it's not, it doesn't come across as something productive. And it's very interesting because now I remember that in the King of the Great Clock Tower, there is a similar thing when the king sees the dance only as some kind of weapon against. I don't know if it's the swine. It's called the swineherd in that play. But anyway. He doesn't see any kind of artistic value to it, or it's just, something that has to result in something tangible. It has to be used as a weapon against something if they use dance, but otherwise it's nothing. It's idleness. And here, the fairy is an anti-reproductive force, and this is why at the end of the play, it's Father Hart who says, "Thus do the spirits of evil snatch their prey almost out of the very hand of God, and day by day their power is more and more, and men and women leave old paths, for pride comes knocking with thin knuckles on the heart." And it's like, the fairy is an anti-reproductive force because she takes women away from their productive roles as wives and mothers.
What the child says is, "Stay and come with me, newly married bride, for if you hear him grow like the rest, their children cook and bend above the churn and wrangle over butter, fowl, and eggs until at last, grown old and bitter of tongue, you're crouching there and shivering at the grave." I mean, that's the world of, and those are lines, I think it's like 378 or so or I'm sorry, about 382 or so that speech starts. And it's, again, that's the vision of that kind of productive life that the child calls upon her to reject. And I think, that sort of uh, the world of the fairies as this place that is not part of the normative cycle of growth,
Yeah.
of female growth and reproduction.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this phrase "to grow like the rest" is the main part of both the fairy child's argument and Father Heart's argument. But it means two different things. Like Father Heart, growing like the rest is the best possible thing that Mary could achieve. And for the fairy, growing like the rest is the worst thing that could ever happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's actually a really interesting part of the play, this kind of palpable competition for Mary's, I wouldn't even say soul, but for Mary's attention, for Mary's love, and even soul. And since Yeats himself said that he put his own despair of desires in the play, for Maud Gunn, like Yeats didn't really understand why Maud Gunn turned him down, and he said that he said something like it must have been for impossible desire, or for a desire for some impossible life, a vague desire for some impossible life, or something like that. We cannot read this, we cannot avoid reading this as an erotic competition.
Yeah. Can I ask, we should move to wrap up a bit because I know you have other things going on, and I want to just ask about how we would interpret Mary's death.
Yeah, good question. She dies so suddenly, like you wouldn't expect it, like, but like, in my PhD, I have, I worked on Gabriele D'Annunzio's plays as well, who's Yeats' contemporary, an Italian dramatist, also very complicated figure. And he had the similar intense influence of a queer woman, Eleonora Duse, on him. And in his plays, for instance, the protagonists who are experiencing oppression, patriarchal oppression, they choose death as a liberation. And the motto of the plays is often liberating death. So death as an escape from a symbolic escape. I think the death is symbolic here. It means, it's also kind of a criticism of the society of the time that like death seems to be the only feasible escape from the normative roles for women, because otherwise they would be judged at the least, and treated as, the fallen women, if they don't conform to these ideals. So I don't know what you think. What do you think?
Well, so yeah, I think that's right. As a symbolic death here, this sort of play has her body remains with the family, as if to say, well, you can have the body, but there's some other level of this, not the soul, but the spirit or whatever that then lives on. That's not in some kind of Christian sense, but in this kind of Celtic fairy sense. And that my feeling is at the end of the play, she does go off with the fairies, like she exists in the realm of the fairies while her body remains behind. And the family will understand this as, what happens to the woman who tries to stray, it leads to death. And they would accept Father Heart's reading, while I think people watching the play are seduced by the call of the fairies and see this as a symbolic death that leads to a kind of liberation.
Yeah, and I think what also changes Mary's attitude is that there is a moment when just not too far from the end of the play, when the fairy child touches or kneels up, the child kneels upon the settle beside Mary and puts her arms about her. And I know that Susan Harris included some performance photos of this, which were published in the sketch. And there, in those photos, Mary looks really like confused, as if, you know, she throughout the play she is in a state of transition. Like this is why I maybe some people will judge me because of that, but I dare call this a coming out play. It's all about, for me, it's all about closetedness and repressed desire, and it just bursts out. And I think we also need to mention that it's not like there are references to the fact that this is not a child. She is older than Mary. And she's just disguised as a child. So they are, you know, shape changers, and she has an age fluidity like Virginia Woolf's Orlando. And this is also relevant because I think in our correspondence once I mentioned to you that an important topic is this feminist queer bond of entrustment that is established here. And in these bonds, like it's always like an older woman through a younger woman learns something about herself through an older woman and gains her own voice or becomes more assertive in what she wants, what she really wants. And it's in this regard, in this light, it's a beautiful process.
It totally makes sense. Like I'm just realizing, my God, there's so many things I could connect with in teaching this with my students that I think would completely change how they would see this play. And I'm realizing, my God, it's a queer play. Like I think you're absolutely right. I think that completely makes sense. And I think a lot of students reading it today will identify with that. You know, students who exist in a closeted world and connection of trust with an older woman, that, you know, and then opening up possibilities of desire that were repressed even and that they were not even able to fully grasp themselves at the outset of
absolutely. And I think it would change the way students perceive Yeats. It's not just that boring fellow idealizing and objectifying women, chasing Maud Gunn, but there are many more interpretations to his plays, and a rich queer history network in his life. And this is why I'm so determined to write this book. I need to find the time. Well,
you should, because I'm going to go back to the Harris piece as well, and thinking about our conversation here. I'm going to teach this play the next time I teach Yeats, because I think this is such a good counterpoint to a lot of the impulse, as I was saying at the outset, that my students tend to have with slotting Yeats into a standard kind of feminist critical reading of the objectification of women. Not that, again, I think that element's there in Yeats, but this opens up a lot of different possibilities to think about.
This is not about, whitewashing that aspects of Yeats's life, because it's there. But what's interesting about his works is there's always this tension between two contradictory forces. One is the authoritarian normativity, like the characters, authoritarian characters who want to contain another set of characters, usually the protagonists, who are very defiant of authority and normative things. We can just look at the Cuchulainn plays, or on Bailey Strand, like the Conchobar-Cuchulainn conflict. So it's always like this tension between the queer and the normative. And this is what creates the possibilities for queer readings today, the queer spaces in the texts, this tension. And I think it needs to be emphasized more. And I know that Joseph Valente, for instance, he has an analysis of Koehalen, Koehalen having an androgynous spirit, and how Yeats interrogates masculinity through Koehalen's hypermasculinity. So there are all sorts of stuff here. And a lot of scholars are doing new, fresh research on this. And it would just be wonderful if I could, contribute to these
but I think it's important
pieces of research.
I think it's important because one of my issues in working with students is really trying to generate renewed interests among younger people in Yeats. And I think sometimes Yeats is viewed as kind of old stodgy sort of person to read, that, why would we bother studying Yeats? And I think this kind of approach really opens up connections for students. I absolutely could imagine my students going through this kind of reading or watching this conversation and having a really different perspective and getting excited about Yeats. So that's great. I want you to write the book. Please do. We will use it in my classes. Let me ask real quick at the end, because I know you mentioned part of what was interesting for you about this play is thinking about it in terms of the Hungarian political atmosphere. So at the risk of being too political here, let's maybe just end with that briefly.
That in Hungary, gender studies as a discipline is banned. So I couldn't even teach a module which has gender in its title. So it's really demonized here. And I took a couple of notes because there are so many things happened over the last 2 years, and not just the 2 years, but over the last 12 years of the Orbán regime. But I'm experiencing. I was in Ireland, for 4 years, so I started to experience this hostile atmosphere 2 years ago, what can be related to the play is that, for instance, recently there was the fourth Democratic Summit was held in Budapest, which the topic was, traditional families. It was basically an international gathering of ultra conservatives on the theme of. I think the theme was the family as a key to sustainability, and even the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence was present. I don't know the exact date of this. It was a couple of years ago, but already during COVID. And this discourse about that family can only be a happy place, changing the constitution, Fidesz changing the constitution, saying that the mother is female, the father is male, and this part of the constitution was written by József Szájer, he became famous because a couple of years ago, when during COVID he participated in a gay orgy in Brussels, and he slided down the drain pipe. I don't know if you have heard about that.
I heard something about that.
So actually, he was also kind of he had to repress his feelings, like he couldn't be an openly gay person. And he wrote one of the most homophobic, heteronormative parts of the new constitution. And the new president of the Republic, Katalin Novák, is basically obsessed with reducing women's role to the domestic sphere. And she has this idea that women shouldn't compete with men, and the only sort of happiness that a woman can achieve is in raising children and minding domestic life. And for her, it's actually not a problem that there is a gender or a pay gap, a gendered pay gap in Hungary, which is still very much present. And there is this whole thing about a children's book, a title, A Fairy Tale for Everyone, which was released in 2020, I think, and it resulted in a huge scandal. And basically, the authors just wanted to offer children alternative heroes that they can identify with. And it includes 17 tales, and only 5 includes like same-sex couples or versions of love, and the other focus on other disadvantaged, marginalized groups of society. But actually, there is one tale in which the protagonist marries a fairy prince, but soon realizes that she's not happy with him. And by the end of the play, she gains her own voice and learns how to, be okay independently. And this children's book was heavily censored, and it was actually publicly shredded by one of the far-right politicians. But this scandal made it very popular. And among people, so it sold out in a week, and now it's translated into 10 languages. So we can consider this a win. But so just this thing that I think what we find if you're teaching this play again, like a lot of people can find a hero in The Land of Heart's Desire that they can actually identify with, looking at her from this perspective that, hey, this is not just about folklore or the changeling, but this is about a woman who hadn't known about who hadn't known herself that much, and there was someone, this fairy child, who was actually older than her, and saw this difference in her and helped her basically come out, or triggered her, and it led to her liberation, which is, well, it's a symbolic death in the play, but as you also pointed out, it has several layers of interpretation. It's open, and that's what's so nice about Yeats' drama. It's open.
I think that's a great way to end. What a fantastic conversation. I go through these, I have these conversations with people focused on works that I've taught so many times, and I always learn something new, and it really energizes my teaching. I'm super excited about teaching this play now. I think my students are really going to connect with it. Taking some students to Ireland this summer for the Yeats Summer School, so I'm going to make sure to talk with them about this play, because I think they're really going to be excited about the kind of reading you offered. So this is fantastic. I absolutely enjoyed speaking with you today, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Robin. It's been so refreshing for me as well, and I really enjoyed speaking about Yeats again. And I hope we see each other in Sligo. We can make it happen somehow.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.